Good morning and thank you. I am Scott Likens, a partner with PwC, and I lead our emerging technologies group based in Hong Kong. So I'm excited to be here, and I apologize. I will also do my presentation in English. Thank you to our translators. I get excited. Colin did a great job talking about how the world is changing. He also talked about how people are changing. So that's exciting. But for me, it's about how technology is changing. I think we're seeing the world be disrupted very fast, and I think Colin also mentioned that a few times. If I think back to my own career, I started university studying to be an airline pilot. I wanted to fly airplanes. I thought that was very cool. So I grew up always wanting to do what my grandfather and my father did. But I got diverted. In the early 90s, when I was trying to pay my way to college, I started working at a software company. And that software company created the first internet browser. Before Netscape, before Internet Explorer, before all of these that we use today, we created Mosaic. In the early 90s, I saw this emerging technology called the internet. So for me, digital is not a new thing. I think digital is something that's been changing our lives for quite a long time. But I get excited now because I think we're seeing new technologies that are changing our world faster than ever. So today, I'm going to focus on technology. I'll try and make it simple to understand, but I want you to get excited. I want you to see the opportunities that are there. So I'll talk about some of the concepts that we saw in the hologram, which of course was a pretty cool technology. But I'll try and bring this to life in where we're seeing real change happen. I'll talk about concepts like the blockchain. Does anyone have a blockchain? No. Does anyone own a Bitcoin? Someone does. You're not admitting it. I'll talk about blockchain and what that's doing, not just to financial services, but to every industry. And I think blockchain will change our lives more than the internet. And I think that's a bold statement. We've heard about artificial intelligence. So I'll try and bring to life what that really means. It's not about the Hollywood movies and the Terminator, but it's about how it's going to change our lives for real today. I'll then move into biometrics. Biometrics is bringing our organic person or our organic identity into this digital world. And now is the time where it's changing very fast. And finally, I'll talk about virtual reality, which is the new reality. But how real are these technologies? No one raised their hand for Bitcoin or blockchain, but I think they're more real than we think. Colin mentioned the first time in history digital businesses in Asia received more investment than anywhere, including Silicon Valley. But if you look up here, you're starting to see blockchain, which is a concept that's only been around 5 to 6 years at best, already starting to get to $500 million or $1 billion US. I think this year we'll see $1 billion. Artificial intelligence, been around a long time, but this year you're starting to see massive investment. Over $1 billion, it's probably quite a bit larger than that. Biometrics, again, receiving a lot of investment, especially to protect consumers, especially to protect the market, but as a necessity of how we're going to interact in the digital world in the future. And I think virtual reality, from a device perspective, from an experience perspective, from a brand perspective, we're going to see this everywhere, and the money is starting to flow. So the question is, how fast will it happen? So let me start very simply with blockchain, one of my favorite topics. Does anyone know who invented the blockchain? No one knows. The blockchain is a concept that was created by an anonymous individual we know as Satoshi. He wrote a paper in 2008 about this concept. The concept was about how to exchange value between people without knowing each other, and more importantly, not trusting each other. Because in the digital world, I may never meet someone that I'm exchanging a good or service with. I may have a business model that says I never see the customer for real. So Satoshi, whoever this is, thought about a new way to use technology. And a lot of this came about because we all know of the global financial crisis. Trust in banking was questioned. people started to question this fundamental financial system that we all rely on. Whether it was our individual accounts or whether it was the way we did business, the world was rocked. The world was disrupted, and it was disrupted very fast. So if we think about, there had never been a surefire way or a guaranteed way to exchange value without someone in the middle. The someone in the middle is typically a bank. It could be a credit card. It could be an insurance company. But there was entire industries built to guarantee this trust. So what happened in 2008? This concept of blockchain was created, and it said we don't need those people anymore. We're going to use technology. We're going to use technology to move value between people or businesses. And this concept is so important because it fundamentally changes everything we do. And it trusts technology. But as Colin stated, the new generation, the millennials, they already trust technology. They trust it more than they trust their banks. So we have a generation of people coming into the market that love technology. So this is perfect timing for the blockchain. So I'm going to try and explain blockchain very simply. It's a very complex topic, and I apologize for the translation ahead of time, but if you think about what the blockchain is, it's a decentralized public ledger of transactions, blocks of validated and cryptographically secured transactions chained together. And we use mathematical algorithms to guarantee that no human can ever create fraud in that system. So what does that mean? The blockchain was meant to create a central way that all transactions are viewed. So imagine a world where your ledger and your business partner's ledger were one and the same, where anyone you were trading with could see these transactions and the value moving. What that creates is a system that doesn't allow double spending, and it ensures the movement of value in the system without anyone in the middle. And it uses very complex technologies to say this has to happen, and there's no way to ever change it. So it's called the immutable or unchangeable universal ledger. And when I say universal, I mean global. Whether we're in Korea or China or the US, it's the same ledger for everyone. So think about that concept. Think about what that changes in business today. And I mentioned Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the first example of how this works. And Bitcoin was created out of thin air, out of mathematical calculations. Bitcoin is the first unregulated digital currency based on blockchain. So these are two separate concepts. Bitcoin was meant to process person-to-person transactions for very little or no cost online in the digital world. Does anyone know the current market cap of the Bitcoin market? $12 billion US today. So in 2008, there was a paper written about a concept in some person's mind that we don't know who it is. It was then implemented in technology that's open source and available to everyone. People started to use this technology and created value out of nothing. No government is behind it. No bank is behind it. No single person is behind it. That market is now worth $12 billion. Now, I know $12 billion is a small number in the grand scheme of financial services, but coming out of mathematics and technology only, without a single owner, no software company, no bank, no government, this is pretty fantastic transformation. This is pretty big disruption happening right in front of us. So today and every day, about 50 million US dollars equivalent are being traded in Bitcoin on the digital markets, into and out of real currencies, whether it's the won or the yuan or the renminbi or the Hong Kong dollar. So we've now created something that's completely digital. And that's important because now we've changed the way we deal with money in the digital world. We no longer have to rely on a bank. We no longer have to rely on physical cash to interact, and that's very important. So mobile payments paved the way. The big mobile payments providers have opened up the market and made the millennials, rely on only a mobile phone to move money around. who goes to a bank branch anymore if there's no cash in the system. Bitcoin takes it to the next level. Blockchain and Bitcoin break down the boundaries of government currencies. They break down the boundaries of regulation, and these are scary things. So it's happening pretty fast, but if you look at this quote, if you think about money, money at its core is simply a ledger for keeping track of debts. And Bitcoin is the best iteration of a universal ledger we've ever seen. This is the former chairman of Citicorp, someone who knows something about money. Blockchain is changing the way value is exchanged in our world, in our digital world especially. So let me talk about what that means. So money's important. So everyone wants to think about how it's disrupting money. But I think as Colin mentioned, we're seeing disruption in every industry because of this fundamental switch. Now remember, this concept of blockchain is barely 2-3 years old. And already we're seeing examples of how it's being used to fundamentally change industries. So when we think about physical or digital assets and how we move those between people today, what do? We typically write down on a contract, we write down on a paper ledger the exchange of ownership. What if that was done completely digitally? The blockchain gives us the ability to do that globally, to register and transfer assets in a completely digital way. There's an example around diamonds and physical high-value assets that I'll get into. Think about public elections. As an American, I don't want to think about public elections right now. It's a tough time. But think about the ability to track everyone's vote in real time, to guarantee no fraudulent votes are in the system, and to have full transparency. It's exciting, but it's scary, because there's a lot of things that rely on the system that we have today. But blockchain could change that. It could create a universal way to do elections with no fraud even possible. Think about storing and accessing your health records in a protected way anywhere in the world. If you travel and you need a doctor, it's very hard to have access to that information. If blockchain was enabled and available anywhere in the world, but protected for you, you could have access to that in real time. That's powerful. So you think about some of the non-financial implications. It could change the way we look at data, personal data, currency data, whatever that data is. So as you hear the rest of the talk around some of the other technologies, blockchain becomes a fundamental enabler of some of the most powerful examples, because it changes the way we share data or assets or value. So keep that in mind. So why is it so different? There's a few things. First of all, it's secure by design. So as I said, I worked on the early days of the internet. The internet was built to share information. It was an open system to share with many people. That's really good, except when you want to move value. The blockchain was made secure by design to move money. So we started at the core leveraging things like cryptography and mathematical algorithms to say, how do we build the most secure system we've ever seen? And I will venture to say that no one's beaten the blockchain today. You've heard about frauds, you've heard about examples. All of those were on the outside of the blockchain. No one's beaten the blockchain. It is designed to always stay ahead of Moore's law that Colin mentioned. Quantum computing, it doesn't matter. The blockchain is meant to stay ahead of that. So it's increased security. It increases transparency. So while regulators don't understand yet how it will be used, they're interested, because it brings transparency to the movement of money. And that's what regulators want. They want to protect markets, they want to protect consumers, and what they need then is a view into what's happening. And today we do that through reporting and through technology looking back. The blockchain gives us that transparency in real time, all the time. So it's pretty powerful. So whether it's about financial services or other assets, I think it's interesting to see what we can do with that increased transparency. It reduces our cost. So any industry that uses third parties or intermediaries to help their business, they typically increase costs. Blockchain will take that cost away. So today, and I'll give an example around a payment, it's quite complex to move money from one person to the other. If we could take everything out in the middle, but guarantee the transaction, it can save a lot of cost. In the back office, and if we think about this, my firm as an audit and assurance firm, we do a lot of work assuring transactions. Blockchain can assure those transactions automatically. And as Colin mentioned, we know this is disrupting our business as PwC. But there's a whole bunch of cost that comes out of the system when we don't have to worry about verifying handoffs. And at the end of the day, it's about reducing transaction time. Whether it's to save cost or create that better customer experience, as Colin mentioned, we can take a lot of time out, and that's really important. So I'll give you two quick examples. I'm born and raised in Chicago in the USA. Chicago is actually one of the first cities, and this is shocking to me because Chicago is not that technology enabled. It's not a smart city. But they're the first city to move their property records, title records, into the blockchain. So now as you buy a property in Chicago, all of the information about the ownership of that property, about the heritage of that property, will be found in the blockchain. And once it's in the blockchain, it can never change. It can only be added to. So every owner after you will have that same view forever. So pretty powerful and pretty simple and pretty cost-effective. It's a free system. Blockchain is an open source technology. So Chicago is leading the way in digitizing property records, and it's pretty exciting. The other one I mentioned is the ever ledger around a diamond. Think about today, we have all sorts of complications around understanding where did a diamond come from, what's the heritage, where it was mined, who owned that diamond in between, and diamonds are typically pretty expensive items. With the Everledger, we can mark a diamond from the time it is mined and follow the life of that diamond, who owned it, whether it was stolen or recovered, every aspect of the life of that diamond. And that's very hard to do today. It's all done on paper, and it's assured through a lot of different processes. The blockchain could solve all of that. These are available right now. So I mentioned today, the transfer of assets is pretty opaque. It's difficult to understand what happens. Just a simple payment goes through counterparties and banks, and there's auditors, and there's third parties, and if you think about how long it takes to settle transactions, we have the concept of N+2, and the world is built around this intermediary-based system. Well, in the future, the blockchain takes all of that away. It says party to party, I can move a piece of value, and the blockchain will do all of the hard work for free in the middle to guarantee it happens and to guarantee I can never double spend, and you can never say you didn't receive the value. So third parties are out of the picture. Intermediary systems are out of the picture. Transferring currencies become very simple. So imagine that world where foreign exchange is automatic. It's pretty different. So think about setting up peer-to-peer autonomous organizations. Organizations that can trade just based on programming and smart contracts because the value exchanges are guaranteed. Think about self-pricing markets, and we heard about robo-advisors. If they had access to this currency real time, it's pretty powerful. That transparency of supply chain. You know, understanding where your medicine, where the molecules came from, the chemist that mixed it, all the way through to the shelf you bought it off of, the heritage of that medicine or food, it's really powerful. And having that secure, trusted way to understand what happened. Finally, we'll combine that next with what artificial intelligence then brings to the table, and it's pretty powerful. So it's not all rosy. I'm a technology evangelist, so I think it's exciting, but there are challenges. This is a new technology. I said it's only 3 or 4 years old, you know, depending on how you look at it. So there's a lot to figure out, but if you think about the 90s, 1994 of the internet, does anyone even remember? Do you care? This is a technology that's going to evolve very fast. So in 2 years, we've seen more progress than in 10 years of the early internet. So I think there's a lot to figure out. We have to figure out scalability. We have to figure out some real technical challenges. We have to figure out regulation. We have to figure out the impact to society. What does this mean? In a world with no currencies, you know, governments lose control. So we have to really look at the implications of this technology. So, blockchain, it's a complex topic. I think it changes the way we interact as people and we work as businesses. So now you start to add on top of that artificial intelligence. And we've heard about it already through this morning, and Colin mentioned it. I also wrote artificial intelligence program, I programmed artificial intelligence 20 years ago. I say this is the year it actually started to scare me. Because artificial intelligence is now tapping into an unlimited amount of data and an unlimited amount of processing. So beyond the general AI, so the robots that we see in Hollywood, there's a real focus on what's called narrow AI, which is robots and automation that solve very specific problems. And that's the AI that's moving very fast. Have you heard of Jack Ma, Alibaba? It's a great quote. He says in 30 years, the best CEO, not the best line worker, not the best designer, the best CEO could be a robot. And Jack knows what he's talking about because he's formed a company that's based on data and artificial intelligence. And if you look at Singles Day, I think it was $16 or $18 billion in 24 hours. Really amazing. They're a great e-commerce company. But if you look at Jack Ma's quote about what they actually did this year, they've switched their mindset around not only being a big data company, but being a big data company that's going to dictate product development to the manufacturers. So no longer are they going to go to a brand and say, what would you like to sell? They're going to go to a brand and say, we're going to tell you what the customers want, you go make it. So think about that as an electronics manufacturer, as a car manufacturer. Anyone that manufactures goods for consumers, they're going to rely on this data and this platform to tell them what to make. That's a very different world that we're soon going to live in. So the question is, what's that going to affect? And this slide gets me in trouble, but The Economist did some research, and what's the 94% chance accountants and auditors will be out of jobs in 20 years? I'm standing on the PwC stage. This is what we do for a business. That's a scary quote. Telemarketers, okay, I'm not that worried, but you start to go down that list. Commercial pilots, okay, well, I'm glad I got out of that industry. The reality is artificial intelligence is very quickly taking roles that are much more than just robots building a car. They're taking roles that we would call more creative roles or intellectual roles. Why? Well, because things like machine learning now have access to infinite amounts of data. The cloud that has come online and the ability to store data forever has given the machines more data than a human can process. So you're starting to see things like the AI doctor, a doctor that can read about every illness ever, a doctor that can understand every drug that exists and every combination of every drug that exists. A human cannot do this. So as you think about that access to data, you think about blockchain now making it very transparent in real time. So it's no longer protected in universities or enterprises. The machines are becoming very smart. So I think we're seeing a massive movement to robotic process automation. So the first step is taking out the repetitive jobs. That's happening. It's happening fast. The next step is taking out the intellectual jobs. So the question is, what do we do next? So I won't go into the details, but there's a lot of math and there's a lot of science that has made this possible. You'll hear terms like machine learning, deep learning, robotics, soft robotics, process automation, narrow AI, very focused artificial intelligence. If you think about your phone today, it has artificial intelligence in it already. You can speak to your phone. It not only can understand you, but it can react and do things for you. That's a very simple example, but it's here today. So I think it's more pervasive than we understand. So what's this going to do? It's going to challenge our current workforce structures. So at PwC, we have, I forget the number, 220 to 240,000 people globally. We know in 5 years that doesn't make sense. It's going to change our workforce. In 2020, 50% of our workforce will be millennials. Millennials don't want to do the same jobs. They don't have the same loyalty to companies. So all of these things happening mean our workforce, everyone's workforce is going to be challenged. The structures that we're used to, organizational, operational, they will change. It's going to disintermediate human decision-making. So we think about a self-driving car today. You may not realize how much AI is happening. How many decisions per second is that car making? Tens of thousands? Possibly millions of decisions? Just to drive down the street, it's deciding what to do millions of times a second. And they're getting better, or they are already better than humans. So it's going to take decisions away from us. It's also going to make things exponentially cheaper. So we saw a big wave of offshoring to save money. It was maybe a 10-to-1 savings. Robotics is a 100 or 1,000-to-1 savings. And that's right now. So as AI becomes more mature, it's exponentially cheaper to use a machine than a human. That's got societal impacts. That's got enterprise impacts. It's going to affect everyone. And to me, it's really about this seamless interaction with endless data. That's why it's become so powerful. And that's not going to slow down. We're going to get more and more processing power. We're going to get more and more data. So AI will get more and more powerful, which means more and more scary to me. But we have to think about these. So imagine all of the data collected on you every day, let alone a lifetime. And then imagine letting an AI help you or your business do things, make decisions in a much better fashion. We today as humans are limited by our connections with other people and the data we retain. Computers are not. They're only constrained by the silicon they run on, which is evolving very fast. So I think, we have to leverage this knowledge. We have to empower our organizations to use it, but we have to think about our strategies as a business around what's going to change. Great quote. The question of whether a computer can think is no more interesting than the question of whether a submarine can swim. Computers will never be humans. They will never have emotions. But do we need them to? I don't think so. So we saw this, and this is not a setup. We saw this in the hologram this morning. What if humans need not apply? We have to think about this as business leaders. We have to think about this as society, because it's happening faster than you probably imagine. So we've talked about how money is changing. We then talked about how our jobs are changing because of artificial intelligence. So what's changing about us as people? This digital world is happening. We have to understand what that means. So biometrics is the link between us as organic people into this digital world. And the consumers are demanding this. As business moves online, we have the concept of online to offline and having that be seamless. How do we identify ourselves? Does anyone have more than 5 passwords? More than 10 passwords? What is an identity online? Because in person, we can identify each other, and that's pretty straightforward. But in the digital world, it's very difficult. So biometrics is the way we bring ourselves into this digital world in the most secure fashion possible. So today, we typically identify with email addresses or passwords or usernames. These are things that can be stolen pretty easily. What if we change that into something about who we are as a person, as a physical being? We all know the Yahoo email hack. It's one of the most recent and one of the largest. 500 million emails impacted, right? This stuff is a valuable resource. People are trying to get this identity information. We have to think about a way to stop it. And as I said, blockchain was secure by design. The internet was not. The internet was meant to be open. So we have to look at things like biometrics. So I think biometrics is changing our reality because it's bridging that gap. And if you think about today, there's kind of 2 aspects to how we can identify ourselves. There's the physical aspects, and I think we all use the thumbprint or the fingerprint, whether it's at immigration or on our phone, and that identifies us pretty uniquely. There's other stuff. We're unique by our DNA. We're unique by our handprint, our retina scan. There's lots of ways to physically identify ourselves. But you have to have more than that today, because even that can be stolen. An HD photograph of your fingerprint could be used to identify you. So we have to kind of think about a multimodal way. And behavioral biometrics are the emerging way to identify people. So if you think about AI and data that I mentioned, we can now start to study how people act individually to verify them. So what's their voice pattern? How do they type on a keyboard? How would they sign their name in the air in multiple dimensions? These are things that are very hard to compromise, very unique about us as people, and something we can join together with the physical attributes. So this combination is why the biometrics are now being looked at as this entry point, as this security that we can now begin to trust. So today, I think just some examples. We obviously have voice verification. We have this behavioral. We're starting to see face, fingerprint, of course, iris. But to me, it's about multimodal. It's about how do we combine these things to create the most secure way, and yet the simplest. Because as a customer, as a person, I have a lot to remember. I want things to be simple so I can interact online. And to me, biometrics are a combination of the most secure technology with the simplest experience. So fast, simple, secure. So think about signing up online. It may take a little bit to get those entry points, but from there on, making it simple, making the machines do the work, understanding what you're doing, where you're doing it, why you're doing it, could all identify whether or not it's you doing it. So very powerful analytics, combined with very powerful artificial intelligence, combined with very powerful physical interfaces, thumbprints, face prints, etc., gives us a very secure way to identify ourselves online. And to me, for all this to work, this is a very important piece to the puzzle. And what that puzzle is our next topic. So I've talked about money is changing. Artificial intelligence is changing how we work. We've now created this way to securely get ourselves into the digital world. So there's a question now, the new reality is virtual. Is everything we're going to do, is the next conference like this going to be in a headset? And if you haven't looked at the market, virtual reality and augmented reality, VR and AR, has made a tremendous shift just in the last 12 months. So 15 or 20 years ago, there was the concept of virtual reality. Anyone know the game Second Life? It was a multiplayer game. It was a virtual reality. It was around in 2000. So that's 16 years ago. But the technology wasn't ready. It wasn't that real. It wasn't a Second Life. Today, the technology is real. Virtual reality and the headsets, the hardware, the physical technology has now turned the corner. The resolution, the bandwidth, things like refresh rate, and it's amazing. So it's brought this amazing technology combined with the power of AI and the power of infinite amounts of data to create a virtual world that's very, very much the new reality. So we're really researching this now to see what does this mean. Because in a virtual world, you need access to a lot of things. Augmented reality is in between. Augmented reality is overlaying the digital world on my physical world. So as I walk around Seoul, I can get enhanced information, again, through another device. So this combination brings a lot of power. It brings a lot of reach into these customers. And as Colin mentioned, creating that ultimate experience, we think VR and AR have made amazing strides. $120 billion by 2020. So a lot of money coming this way. A lot of it's in the physical hardware, but a lot of it's in the experience around it. And if you haven't heard of some of the vendors, there's a lot of new vendors. A lot of this stuff is being pioneered by the gaming and entertainment industries, of course. But the reality is many industries with big workforce, with big agencies, with big branches, with big manufacturing footprints are looking at this technology to optimize their workforce. So beyond gaming, think about being able to train on a nuclear reactor anywhere in the world without having to be in front of that reactor. Being able to train on a large ship or at a port. Creating a workforce engagement in a virtual world that is indistinguishable from the real world. This is powerful. So I think we're seeing good momentum around entertainment, but big focus on opportunities in optimizing core businesses. I won't get into the details, but this is not an easy journey. So as you think about all of the technologies and all of the techniques you have to start to bring together. So not only is it just creating an application or a game, it's about how do you tell a story differently. So when I was a kid, there was a set of books called Choose Your Own Adventure. The book could end in a different way based on who you were. Virtual reality is similar. You're creating an environment where the user gets to select what they do and the story they want to hear. So thinking about how to create something as a brand becomes very difficult. Being creative and being unique in that world becomes very difficult. On the flip side, the technology lets you now engage people in a very different way. It lets you bring in immense amounts of data about them. You know, imagine a world where you don't have to go to your bank ever. You don't have to sit down in front of an insurance salesman. You can interact with a robo-advisor that looks like a regular human, that knows everything about you, that has the best advice. You can ask any question. They can explain it simply, and you're just sitting at your desk. When you take off that headset, you're back at home. It changes the way we interact with our customers. Even in the B2B world, you think about selling as a manufacturer to massive amounts of factories across Asia. The travel, the connections, the interactions, all of that could be optimized in this virtual world. So I think this combination around getting to the endpoint customer is amazing, and we're seeing a lot of focus. I think the opportunity is around that midpoint, around how do we actually optimize our experience with people we do business with, and then effectively, at the endpoint, our customers. So I wanted to wrap up with a few examples, and I like to think big. So as Colin said, I want to end on an exciting note. I talked about these emerging technologies, and again, I have a unique view. I think this is something that's happening faster than you think. I saw the internet from the early days, and it was exciting. But this technology is moving fast. Colin mentioned a term called agile, this fail-fast mentality, test and learn. The technology startups are doing things at the pace enterprises can't understand. It is not about yearly or quarterly, it's about daily. We work a lot with Google. Google does 900 releases a month just on search. Think about that. 900 product releases per month, every month, just on search. To me, search is one box and a button. Search is very basic. That's the agility you have to think about. That's the agility that blockchain and AI and biometrics and VR are pushing. And to Colin's point, the customers want it. They require it. And if you don't give it to them, someone else will. And someone else maybe not in your industry. That's what you got to think about. So let's say, imagine a world where currency doesn't matter. Imagine you as a business can trade with your partners and never worry about Forex, never worry about cash settlement, never worry about T+2, it's T0. Imagine a world where going, again, yuan to dollar doesn't exist. We can trade directly with our partners in real time and guarantee it. This is powerful, but this is scary. This is different. Governments are thinking about what this means, regulators. But as a business, you could do this today. You could do this today. You could trade with your partners and never touch a currency. Completely virtual. Imagine a world where your personal data is everywhere, but more safe than it's ever been. So we heard about the Yahoo email hack. Why is it different now? Well, the blockchain world says that no one person owns your data, and that data is always protected more safely than we've ever seen. But it's everywhere, so I can easily access it. I can get to it when I need it, but no one else can. And it uses the magic of math, or maths. It uses the magic of math and science and technology, and you have to trust it. But at the end of the day, does anyone in here know what TCP stands for, or HTTP, or how it works? Maybe, maybe not, but you don't care. The internet works. So in the future world, or I'd say the world today, this works. Imagine a world where you trust your peers more than your banks. Today, we talk on social about everything, and Colin said in Asia more than ever, they trust their social networks. That's now starting to move into money, P2P lending, crowdsourced funding. People are moving into things they trust, their own personal network. And the digital technologies have made that very simple, very effective, and very effectively cost zero. I mentioned this one. Imagine a world where you have one single enduring digital identity. How many passwords do you have to remember today? I have about 27, I don't know. It's a lot. Imagine a world where that's just one, and it's you as a person. It's understanding the interactions you have and the biometrics about your physical being. It's very different. So I say the future starts here. It started, but it's going faster than ever. I get excited. I'm happy to chat in more detail, but thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and have a great morning and rest of the day with the sessions. Thanks.